many years ago, we had a mailbox. And so I went and got the mail, and inside the mail was a risque magazine. And so, I grabbed it, through the mail. As I'm going through the mail, I see it and immediately throw it away. Well, I saw my wife maybe sometime in the next few hours or towards the end of the day, whatever it was, and I let her know. I said, hey, this thing came in the mail. I saw it. I chucked it in the trash. And I think she said something like, okay, thanks for letting me know. So Jason.
Ryan.
Here we are.
Here we are 20 years later.
So the lifeguards, we want to welcome everybody to the lifeguards and just say that we're here to serve and bring perspective. We're just a couple of regular guys sitting on one of those, lifeguard stands, scanning the horizon, looking for sharks that are heading your way. You might be flailing out there, or we might see some people who are flailing, have some stories of our own flailings or drowning or near drowning, and just try to share some of those experiences. We're talking about life, anything to do with life, marriage, relationships, family, kids, business, money. Whatever it is, we want to talk about it. We want it to be an inspiration to you. We want to inspire you to keep growing, and we want to encourage you to be a lifeguard for others in your community, and to keep looking out for each other. So, welcome.
Welcome. And thank you so much if you're watching or listening to this. Like Rye said, we're two regular guys. We are married. Rye's got a couple kids. I've got a few kids, 9 to be exact. So I've made lots of mistakes that I'm going to be sharing some of those mistakes. But today we're going to look at one of those aspects of your life. We talked about children, business, family, relationships, career, all sorts of different areas. But today we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at one aspect of marriage and how that can really make a difference in your life. So what is one thing that you have found that has made an impact in your marriage for good or for bad?
I would say transparency. My wife and I have been married 19 years, and transparency was one of the kind of the fundamental foundational elements from the beginning, even when we were dating. And I'm just wired for transparency. I don't like hiding things. I don't like being deceptive. I have a pretty strong conscience. Some might say an overactive conscience. And so I found that when I can just share what's really going on, that it's not stirring in my head, and I feel like I'm not kind of in this perpetual loop of, I don't feel good about this, but I don't want to say it out loud to somebody else, and particularly maybe my wife, whatever. And so I decided and found a long time ago that it was just better to, if that stuff starts happening in my head or something's happened that I feel like my wife needs to know, I'm going to go ahead and let her know. And so we did that early on, and then continued into our marriage. And it's been one of the most fruitful parts of who we are in our relationship. And it provides significant intimacy across our relationship. And so I would say transparency is one of the.
So when you say transparency, are you talking honesty? What do you mean exactly by transparency? And
yeah.
Do you have an example?
Yeah. So I do think that honesty and transparency are connected, and we have to have honesty. I do think that transparency is different, because transparency, you're actually revealing something that could be used against you. It could hurt you. You're actually being vulnerable. Honesty, you could be vulnerable, but you could also be just, I don't want to go to that restaurant today, or I don't like this particular thing. Is that transparency? I mean, maybe, but maybe not. But when you share something like, I had this particular situation that happened today, and I felt uneasy about it. There was a check in my heart or spirit, and I didn't like it, and I want to share it with you. I want you to know that this happened. That's more on the transparency side. Or like, I did something today that I regret, and it's connected into our relationship, and I want you to know about it. So that would be more of a transparency moment than just being honest.
Right. And maybe not that we're psychologists or psychiatrists or counselors or anything. Maybe there is a scale of perhaps honesty and transparency are on a scale that you can move one way or the other. And the more vulnerable, I think is the word you used, you are, the more you are leaning to the transparency side. I think of the other day we were going to get some groceries and some ladies walked by and I said to my wife, like, is it just me or are women wearing less clothes these days than they had before? And exhibit A and exhibit B walk right by. And I felt like I just kind of had to say that. So my wife had an idea of where my head was at. And, you know, I noticed these things. And so I feel like that was just an example of a transparent moment where I felt like, okay, I just need to get this out there because I'm noticing this. And there's a risk in that. I know my wife, we've been married for 18 years too. I kind of understand how she's going to react when we talk about things. But with the first time you do that, you know, you are kind of taking a risk. Like, I don't know how she's going to respond, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think transparency is built over time. And I think it's a daily decision. I think you can choose to be transparent today, or you can choose to not be transparent today. And what I don't want people to feel is this like burden. We're not talking about something else to burden you. This isn't. I'm not saying people need to be walking around with burdens of like, I got to tell my wife or my husband everything that happened today, and if I don't, I'm not being transparent, and we're not going to have a good marriage or something.
Sure. Yeah.
You're free. Be free. But when moments that are significant enough that it's stirring you, you know, in your head, you're thinking about what happened, whatever it was. I remember. I'll give you an example. This is just this didn't involve another person, but so I remember many years ago we had a mailbox that was like you know, like not a mailbox at your street, but like in a facility, whatever. And so I went and got the mail, and inside the mail was a risque magazine or a flyer or something, but it was very, very risque. And so, you know, I grabbed it, you know, through the mail. As I'm going through the mail, I see it and immediately throw it away. Well, I saw my wife maybe sometime in the next few hours or towards the end of the day, whatever it was, and I let her know. I said, hey, this thing came in the mail. I saw it. I chucked it in the trash. And I think she said something like, okay, thanks for letting me know. And to her, maybe that was a moment of, and of course we'd been building transparency along that path before that. Did I do something wrong in that moment? I don't think I did anything wrong. So why did I tell her? Why did I feel the need to tell her? Well, because I feel like there's an opportunity for later on my own thoughts. I can get lost in my own thoughts, and accusations can form. And so I find that it's much better just to, hey, this thing popped up. This is what happened. Or let's say in that case, and there's been times where something's come up on, again, a video or something, and some somewhat, you know, inappropriate thing or whatever, an actual inappropriate thing pops up, and I don't look away fast enough. You know, I take a second look. And that's another moment where I might go, you know, this thing happened. I want to tell you about it. I took a second look, or I spent a little extra time like investigating it or watching it or whatever it was. And you know, I shouldn't have, and I'm sorry. And, you know, is she God? No, she's not, but she's my wife and we're one. And so from my perspective, anything that impacts our relationship and the intimacy of our relationship and the purity of our relationship, I want to be mindful of the things that I want to share with her about that, and I want to keep that pretty clean and clear. And again, it's not a burden thing. I don't tell her every negative thought I have, or you know, every time something that happens in my head that shouldn't. But there are moments where something will stir in me to the point where I'm thinking about it more than just a nanosecond, and I go, I want to talk to her about this, and I want to vent this. And she is very kind and generous, and says, thank you for letting me know. And then there's times where, from an accountability standpoint, she might go, well, and then she might make a suggestion, or she might ask a question to go, well, what do you think you need to do to prevent that next time, or what could we do to make that, not a reality, or whatever. So it's not always just like a thank you. So to your point about, could she get upset? Certainly. If I came home and said, I kissed a girl today that I saw on the street, I don't think she's going to be like, okay, honey, thanks for letting me know.
Yeah.
So, not all interactions or mistakes are the same level.
Yeah.
It's not all the same. But the things that you can share, and again, you might have a situation where you're with a female, and as a guy, and you can tell there's some flirting happening. Maybe she's flirting with you, maybe you flirted with her, maybe there's just something that just went a little too far, or you're just sensing something, and that might be an opportunity. You go, hey, honey, I just want to tell you about this interaction. I didn't like it today. It made me feel uncomfortable, or I just got a little too playful with this person. I just got a little. I didn't, there was no touching. There was no, we didn't exchange emotional intimacy, but I was a little bit too playful. I was a little bit too flirty, or they were, maybe. And I just want to let you know about it. They touched my hand. Seriously. They're being kind. And I've had people who have been vendors or people, and we're in a situation, and they happen to be like, oh Ryan, whatever. And they're not thinking anything. That's not a big deal to them. But I'm not a big, touch opposite gender people, particularly
that I'm not married to.
And so, if those moments happen, they happen for the right reasons, and that sort of thing. But I'm not a big extra touch, particularly maybe high five.
Sure.
But we try to be cautious about what sort of interactions are like that. So those are some examples. But again, none of this is burdensome. I'm not telling you or anyone else what they need to do in terms of transparency or vulnerability or sharing. I'm just saying, from my perspective, I've found that over the 19 years that we've been married, the more that I share with her, the more intimate we are, and the less she has to be concerned about me.
Mm-hmm. She knows where your head's at.
She knows where my head's at. She knows if I'm struggling with something. She's my best friend. So if I need accountability on something, eating is one of my weak areas, and so she's involved in that. And sometimes I listen to her, full disclosure, and sometimes I do not. A couple of nights ago, she was like, I was eating some M&Ms in the kitchen. It was actually after we had done some stuff, and I came home, and I was tired and hungry, and I hadn't eaten well earlier. And I found some M&Ms and something, and I'm standing there, I'm just watching something. I'm popping the M&Ms, and she walks into the kitchen. She looks at me, and then she reaches over and grabs the M&M box.
I'll take those.
And I'm like, no, don't do that. And then she walks over to the trash can, and she starts
she just dumps it.
Oh, you could hear all the M&Ms going into the trash can. And my heart is breaking. I'm like, oh my gosh. But anyway, so
it's good to, you mentioned earlier, it gets it out of your head. It brings some freedom when you bring things out into the light.
Yeah.
As opposed to keeping it in the dark.
Yeah. Because what happens in the dark is it's like mold. It's wet and dark, and secrets are like mold. They grow. And if you're trying to keep a secret, it's like trying to not think about something.
Mm-hmm.
Don't think about the banana, don't think about it. And that stuff starts stirring, and you start getting accusations. These accusations start coming out. You start feeling accused, even if you didn't do anything wrong, and I've experienced that, various times in my life. Powerful, just, something happened. It was like a level 1 thing, maybe you tripped slightly, but not much. And by the end of the day, it feels like a level 8. it's almost like it's being rewritten.
Because you keep playing it over in your head.
Yeah,
and it's getting worse.
And little seeds are being sown into it, and the batter is being stirred, and we got ingredients that didn't come from you maybe, and now it's like you've made this cake that's like awful, and it's grown and expanded, and now you're like, I'm a horrible person. I'm like, I've had an affair. Like, what's going on? It's like, no, that isn't what happened. Like, but when as you start to repress things, and again, I'm not a psychiatrist, psychologist, counselor. I don't play one on TV. But my experience has been when I start to push anything down, it just starts expanding and growing, and it does not go well for me. So that I like to just get things into the light, get them exposed, be on the front end of things. If something happened and you want to share it. Don't hold back. Particularly if you can build into that where both of you have that openness and honesty and transparency, it brings the rest of your relationship. It just brings you a lot of intimacy.
If you're getting started in a relationship, maybe you're young married, they're watching, listening to this right now, and they have not engaged in this kind of conversation and being that vulnerable. What's a step or something they can do to start getting that ball rolling and not maybe bearing their whole life and every evil thing they've ever done, but what's a start? How can someone start?
Well, I think you choose something from today that stood out to you that maybe you didn't do well, even if it doesn't affect the relationship. So like I said before, maybe it's not even a marriage or a relational specific thing, but most people don't like being wrong. And maybe men really don't like being wrong.
Maybe statistically speaking.
I mean, if I had to make a statistic, I'd say like 99.999% of men don't like being wrong. We really, really, really don't like it. And you feel like you're losing sometimes when you're sort of sharing that like failure. I messed up today, whatever it may be. And so I feel like that's the starting point is like, hey, I'm going to take responsibility for this. I'm not going to point blame, which is often what we want to do. It's what I want to do. Like, oh my gosh, the kitchen's a wreck. Like, who did this? You did it. You did it. You did it. One of my kids, like, okay, who's on dish duty? It's like immediately I just want to know who's to blame, and let's start pointing some fingers and let's get somebody on it. And, and then ultimately it's like, it all comes back to me. Like it all comes back to me at some point. So I think that would be the suggestion, is start with some situation that you can just share and then build on that. And if you have a negative interaction with your spouse, own up to it. If it's something that you almost always, when there's conflict or when there's some disagreement, there's almost always sin, you could say, wrongdoing on both sides. So let's just walk into the situation going, we've got some conflict. I probably had a part to play. And that's hard. That's hard for me. But if we kind of walk into it with that sort of premise, like, I probably had a part to play in this. So let's go ahead and get that over. Like, I'm sorry for my part, and try to identify what that might be. And then again, just on the transparency side, just finding that thing that when something does come up, be quick to share it, and don't wait for the giant stuff. If you start with the small stuff, then the bigger stuff gets easier. And I'll tell you this, from my own experience, the more that you're sharing the littles and the mediums or the whatever, you're not getting to the bigs. It helps you not get to the bigs. So at least that's been my experience. So hopefully that will continue.
Yeah. I think I heard someone once say, or I read it in a book, it's easier to build a fence at the top of the cliff than to have an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. And if you're getting those small things out, you hopefully don't ever get to some of the big things. So to summarize, if you want to wreck your marriage, hide stuff, let it grow and fester in the dark. And that's a good way to really drive your marriage into the ground.
Yeah, isolating yourself, would be the best way to destroy your marriage over time. Isolating yourself and making it seem like you're sharing things from your day, but don't actually share the most intimate. I have a very, very close friend who ended up in a divorce, and he told me that his ex-wife never let him get beyond the windows of her eyes. And, you know, I love them both. I was close to both of them, and I hear that, and I was around them, you know, when they were married, and I just think, how could she not let him get beyond the window of her eyes? And I saw other areas of their life that were seemingly intimate, that I would have thought, of course they're emotionally intimate, but it turns out they weren't. They weren't actually talking about things that mattered. They weren't talking about the deep things. They weren't wrestling in some of these conflicts. And so, you know, part of the isolation is you keep your thoughts to yourself. You don't share those. You know, you just isolate. And if your spouse knows, you know, 10 or 15% of you, that's okay. And my perspective is that's a recipe for disaster, and for ultimately it could lead to divorce. So I would encourage you to get beyond the windows of their eyes and share the intimate details, the things that really matter. And there's going to be some conflict. I think that'd be the other thing that I would encourage people, maybe someone who hasn't been married very long. There's going to be conflict. And there's nothing wrong with conflict. It's just the way that we are. We're humans. We're flawed. We're going to have conflict. And so learning to fight well without harming each other, without wounding each other, without scarring each other, I think that's the aim, but not fighting. You know, if you haven't had a conflict in the last 6 months in your marriage, again, I would be very surprised by that. And I would, from my own perspective, I would question, why is that? How is that possible? Because maybe like you, I married someone who's very opposite from me. Mm-hmm. And I loved all those things when I first met her, you know, all the things that were different about her, I was drawn, you know, opposites tend to attract. But then as you get married and you start living together and you're with each other all the time, some of those things that were opposite from you, they begin to annoy you. They begin to make you like, can't you change that a little bit? Like,
they wear on you a little bit.
Yeah. Like that particular thing you don't seem to be able to do super well, that I can do really well. I'd really like you to be able to do that well. And I've been married 19 years, and some things they're not going to change. Some things won't change because that's who, part of it is who they are. Other things do. Other things have. But the idea that like two human beings are going to live together and not have conflict, I think is crazy. We're going to have conflict. So be open to it, embrace it. Don't sweep stuff under the rug. Hit it head on, and know when to shut up. Know when, and that's just hard for me. Know when to engage in the conflict and when to keep your mouth shut and just deal with your own crap. I mean, there's times where I'm in a bad mood or I'm having a bad day or a bad week or whatever the situation is, and I don't feel good, and I want to take it out on her. You know, some little thing comes up, and now all of a sudden I'm escalating, and 90% of it has nothing to do with her, but I start to direct it towards her. And so, you know, don't do stuff like that. You know, choose the battles that are meaningful and that are impacting you. And again, be truthful. Be as truthful as you possibly can.
So, Rye, it's been really good just hearing some of your ideas and thoughts about marriage and about family on the Lifeguards episode today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We super appreciate it. If you want to hear more of our stories and kind of see what's going on with the Lifeguards, you can find us online at thelifeguards.net, and we'd appreciate hearing from you. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at The Lifeguards. What else do we have, Rye?
YouTube. Yeah, thelifeguards.net. And we're just very thankful for the opportunity to be able to share and just hopefully give a little bit of information and encouragement and hope and humor and just talk about life. So if there's particular topics you'd love to hear, we would love to hear from you about what those are, so we can include those in future episodes. Yeah, we're just here to serve you guys. So any way we can do that, please let us know.